Good afternoon. My name is Tom Bickel, and today on behalf of the Brown Undergraduate Law Review, I have the privilege of being joined by Professor James Tierney as part of our alumni interview program. Professor Tierney was a political science concentrator and a graduate of the class 2006. Shortly after Brown, Professor Tierney went on to earn both a master's and a JD from UChicago, after which he clerked for the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit. Afterwards, he went on to practice law at Mayor Brown, and then for 5 years he served as senior counsel in the Office of the General Counsel of the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, also known as SEC. Today, he teaches as an assistant professor at the Nebraska College of Law, and his research focuses on stock market regulation, investment management, and corporate finance. Professor Tierney, thanks for joining me today.
To be here. Thanks for having me. And I got to say, this is a really cool project that y'all are doing for Brown and for yourselves. And I wish that someone had the idea when I was an undergrad.
Thanks. We appreciate that. So as a first topic of conversation today, given your expertise and your experience with SEC, we want to hear a little bit about your reaction to the infamous GameStop short squeeze that happened this past January. It obviously got criticism from both sides of the aisle, and it's very unclear to students, at least, who was in the right and who was in the wrong there. So could you talk a little about that?
Yeah, for sure. So there are a couple big players in the GameStop saga, and maybe we could just take a step back and talk about what actually happened. So one of the things that has been amazing about the internet is it has let people communicate more and solve collective action problems, right? The idea that it is hard for us to coordinate over things that require people acting in concert. And this has always been a problem in terms of people participating in the stock market. And there are some internet forums on Reddit where people have identified possible stocks that might be, good buys, good sells. And people bored during the pandemic, trying to find new sources of entertainment, turning to financial message boards like Reddit, and then able to trade more easily on apps like Robinhood that don't offer or that offer zero commission trading of the sort that typically used to be a real drag on people's ability to trade stocks. So all of these things together kind of came to a head in January 2021, when a group of folks on the internet noticed that there was a particular problem in the sorts of bets that were happening in the market about the future direction of the stock price for GameStop. And GameStop, as we might recall, is a brick and mortar retail store that sells and resells video games. Historically, not thought to be a great business model. There might have been some turnaround action. And this was really popular for folks on the internet, right? Especially for those of us who have kind of been extremely online for upwards of 25 years, right? Where all you remember is GameStop. This is kind of a legacy brand. And so people were really excited about it. And there were some kind of sophisticated financial observers on internet message boards who noticed that there was a particular structure of the market where there were more people betting against shares, betting that the share price would drop, taking a short sale position, then really you could technically execute those trades for kind of complicated reasons. But essentially, there were folks who thought, well, this is a situation that we can exploit for profit. And the idea was that you might be able to buy options, and through a series of kind of hedges, this would increase the stock price for the stock like GameStop. There's kind of a pop culture element of this and a kind of a populist element, where perhaps some of the folks on this message board were thinking, we can strike back at the evil hedge funds who were mainly the ones making these big directional bets. And, that's certainly part of it. But the SEC issued a release, a report earlier this week that kind of looked at the whole GameStop saga, looked at the sorts of trades that were happening. And, they kind of were surprised at the result that this narrative, which I think was really popular, that there was a group of traders on Reddit who were trying to squeeze hedge funds using this kind of sophisticated effect of options on stock prices. They're like, that kind of didn't really happen, or it wasn't really the cause of the run up of the stock price. And at least from the SEC's perspective, and they, just so everyone is on the same page, right? They're the federal agency that oversees and regulates the stock markets, as well as the firms like Robinhood, broker dealers that operate within them. And so they took a look at this situation and they said, well, it didn't really seem to be what the news really latched onto, which was the role of Reddit traders.
Just to clarify,
Sure.
GameStop stock was already volatile prior to the short, right?
Yeah, so there was a certain amount of volatility prior to the short, right? I think the bigger issue that the SEC took issue with was that there seemed to just be a lot of buying by people, and the sorts of options trades that they saw in the market didn't really indicate that this was the main driver of prices. It seemed that like the options trades were going in the wrong direction from the SEC's perspective. But the takeaway is that there was in fact a huge surge in demand for GameStop stock, and you can't just attribute it all to these folks who were maybe trying to do this creative trade and squeeze a hedge fund, but there was maybe something else going on. And I think that's really interesting because it raises a lot of questions about who participates in stock markets and really what the value of a stock is, right? So if it turns out that the internet, social media, free trading, if all of these things make it easier for people to trade, then that might have some good effects, right? We might have more people participating in shareholder governance. One of the things that shareholders can do is vote on the future direction of a company's policies by, director nominations and things like that. And historically, individual investors are kind of apathetic. They don't really want to deal with it, and so they don't participate. It's possible that this might lead to either more participation in governance or in people buying the stocks of good corporations.
Right. So that's the idea of how GameStop, or not GameStop, how Robinhood claims to have the objective to democratize finance, right?
Yeah.
That's part of their mission. And could you gauge whether you think that they're actually successful in that endeavor, or whether that's possible for anybody?
I mean, I think it's a good it's a good question, and you kind of have to think about the claim "we are democratizing finance" as actually meaning two things. One, it means we are making finance more accessible to more people, right? We'll take a look at that in a sec. There's also, we are making finance more democratic and like more responsive to the entire society. And I think that's a separate thing, right? So from the perspective of, are you making, increasing access to markets and trading? Absolutely, right? When I was in college, you had to pay $10, $15 per trade, and there weren't really as many opportunities to like buy a fraction of a share. All of these things have made it easier by reducing barriers to entry and transaction costs for people. And so that means that more people are kind of able to put small amounts of money in the market. And if you kind of agree that in a capitalist economy, one of the only ways that you can reliably grow your wealth is through investing in corporate stocks or kind of other similar asset classes, then traditionally finance and what it tells you to do to invest is going to be okay with that, because it's increasing the pool of people who can participate in capital markets and increasing wealth. There is a separate issue, right, where Robinhood is perhaps doing that by making these sorts of trades free, lowering those barriers to entry. There's the other aspect of democratizing markets, where if it turns out that you're really just kind of concentrating participation in the stock market in already wealthy people, or in people who have interests that kind of don't align with the rest of society, there's still a possibility that like the interests of shareholders are not going to match the interests of everyone. And so oftentimes I think when people think about the democratization of finance, and maybe there's a little bit of this in the discussion about Robinhood too, there's this idea that, the younger generation is going to bring in, it's like preferences for in being good at the environment and like social and like good governance and all of the kind of buzzwords in stock markets these days and investing. And if it turns out that just like the interests of the two groups don't align, then I think that democratizing finance is probably the wrong term. It sounds more just kind of like you're opening up finance to a broader group of people. And like that may well be good as well. So in
Right.
that sense, I think Robinhood has had a really kind of positive effect.
Right. It's impossible to talk about Robinhood's stated mission without mentioning how, there's this really popular notion based off, the what happened in January, that by freezing the buy option while GameStop was being shorted, that favors the big market players and it screws the little guy, right? So in your view, how much credence to that idea is there, or is that really an inaccurate description of what actually happened?
Yeah, so sure. I'll just take a brief kind of pit stop and just like
Sure.
because I'm gonna start talking a little bit about like regulation and market
Yeah.
plumbing, and so I just want to make sure everyone's on the same page, right? So at the outset, some terminology. I'm going to talk about broker dealers, which is kind of the companies that are regulated under federal and state law that help people trade. And Robinhood is an app that is a broker dealer. And I work a lot in the area of law that deals with regulating them. So, the outages are of course kind of controversial for a couple reasons, but especially from the perspective of traders who think that there is something nefarious going on. And the kind of underlying market plumbing explanation makes it sound a little bit less nefarious. But then there's a kind of overarching problem that maybe makes us skeptical that Robinhood is doing the right thing. So just to kind of illustrate, right? There are complex rules about what happens when you try and move stock from one person's account to another, right? If you are trying to sell and another person is trying to buy, there's actually a whole lot of stuff that happens in the market plumbing behind the scenes during a pretty short 2-day period. And you could picture like a hub and spoke arrangement where if I sell and someone else buys, that stock has to travel through the spoke to the bicycle hub and then back, and then the money has to come through the other way. And that hub, a central counterparty, is designed to make sure that, or to reduce the risk that one of those two spokes, the broker who represents the buyer or the seller, isn't gonna hold up their end of the deal. So they might, fail to give the money or fail to give the shares when they're trying to do that transaction. And that central counterparty is there to kind of make sure that everything goes as smoothly as it can. One way it does that, ensuring against problems in the spokes at the brokers, is to make sure that they cough up enough money to kind of cover other losses. And the amount of money they have to cough up is a function of a couple different factors, including, among other things, how volatile the trades are, as well as how much, buy orders versus sell orders, what the imbalance is between those two components of the order flow is from, firms at any time. And that's because that central counterparty nets them all off, right? So if you have a +2 and a -2, that nets to 0. You don't have to move any shares. You're all golden. And what happened, I think, broadly during the outages is during times of great market volatility, the amount of money that brokers have to cough up as kind of collateral to make sure they're still good at the counterparty or at the clearinghouse, that goes up. And the more that brokers have customers that really want those volatile stocks and maybe are kind of sending more buy orders than sell orders, you're going to have an even higher amount of money that you have to cough up. So Robinhood had to do that. And those rules governing this system I've been talking about have nothing to say about what brokers can do in terms of like shutting down access to markets. That's a matter of contract, and it illustrates the importance of reading those terms of service that everyone just kind of like flips through and then presses yes to, because brokers in those terms of service that you agree to say, we can stop your trades for any time, at any time. And my understanding of what Robinhood was doing was that they were basically shutting off the ability to get new buy orders, but still letting sell orders go through. partly because they didn't want to increase the imbalance and increase the volatility in this stock that would then make them have to cough up more money.
So there's nothing illegal about freezing the buy option.
Well, I mean, I don't want to say there's nothing illegal, but like from the evidence I've seen, it doesn't seem like there's something that they're going to get, jammed about, and they've been sued, right? I mean, it is a central allegation in lots of the complaints against Robinhood, and it hasn't gone a whole lot anywhere yet. So,
right.
But that's a separate question of like whether they should have done it, right? And in many markets, reputation is really important. And if it turns out that you're a broker dealer who like caters to people who love casino-like stocks, and those people also don't want to get shut off from trading, and then you start shutting off trading, your customers might get mad at you, and it might bear poorly on your reputation, and the market might punish you in terms of your market share or whatever. I'm not sure that has happened for Robinhood, in part because people have accounts there. It's hard to switch, especially if you also own crypto. So they seem to have weathered the storm pretty well, but it does raise broader questions about Robinhood's role in the broker dealer ecosystem.
Right. The most confusing thing about the whole controversy, to me at least, I've debated this idea a lot with my friends, is that if Robinhood simply wanted to save their face for media purposes or what have you, why wouldn't Robinhood simply freeze both the buy and the sell option at the same time? And then in the meantime, or the downtime that those options are frozen, they can just raise money, as apparently they've been able to do very successfully, pay off the clearinghouse fee for excessive volatility, and then you don't have accusations for them being, the nefarious actor that they've been portrayed to be since January. How come they didn't do that in your view?
So I think a big part of the nefarious actor framing is that they just haven't been really good at transparency and PR management. And so I think they haven't done a good job of explaining this, and they've let a lot of kind of stuff stand out there. So the big difference in buy and sell orders is, remember I was talking about, the amount of money that brokers like Robinhood have to cough up in collateral on days of really high volatility. One of the drivers of that fee, or the amount that they have to cough up, is the imbalance between buy and sell orders. And that's because at the end of the day, when this counterparty or the clearinghouse is trying to figure out where to move stocks from account to account, they're trying to figure out how many buy orders minus the number of sell orders, and that's going to change the end of day amounts, right? It's like a netting process. And so Robinhood basically had a ton of buy orders and was facing a big imbalance in buy orders, many more buys than sells. And the bigger that imbalance got, the more buy orders it let in, the bigger the collateral it would have to post with the clearinghouse. If they stop letting buy orders in and then start letting people sell, you might eat away a little bit at some of that imbalance. And at least that's kind of the concept behind where I see they were coming from. I don't really know that that's kind of how they've explained it, but it does seem to be kind of the technical plumbing reason.
So essentially, it's that they could have frozen both options, but it was much more expensive to pay to do it that way than it was to do it the way that they did, which was just shut off the one option, let the balance come back to normal, and then pay probably less in clearinghouse fees. Right.
Yeah, that's basically a way of thinking about it. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Cool. So I think we should probably get to the career questions now, right?
Cool. Yeah.
So you're a law school professor now, obviously. Can you give us just kind of your casual best pitch on why going to law school is worth it when, coming out of Brown, obviously half of Brown goes to investment banking, where they can make six figures much more quickly than any aspiring lawyer ever could?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. I get the sense, so I'll speak to a couple different audiences here, right? There's definitely one audience that is like, I have done moot court or mock trial for years, and I want to be a lawyer. And then there's another group that is probably like me, that got most of the way through a pre-med curriculum and was like, I'm out of this, right? And trying to figure out what other options are if, like me, you didn't want to do investment banking. So you ask kind of, is it worth it, and what my pitch is. And just, fair disclosure, I'm sitting at a law school that has, I think, the lowest, or if not second lowest, debt load of graduating students of any law school in the country. And we're really proud of that. And it means that students kind of don't have to go into high paying law firm jobs, and they can kind of have the practice that they want. And so I'll talk a little bit about that and what the worth of a law degree is over maybe the next couple minutes. So, depending on what kind of law you want to get into and where you want to live and how much debt you might have to take on to go to law school, law can be a really fantastic career if your goal is not necessarily just to be a lawyer, if you're not a true believer, but because you kind of are like a, humanities, social sciencey oriented person who aspires to a solidly upper middle class or upper class lifestyle. But just to throw out some numbers, according to the US Bureau of Labor Statistics, the median annual wage for lawyers in 2020 was $127,000 a year. It's a bit less, or it's a bit misleading because it depends on what sort of work you want to go into. Folks who really want to do public interest work, are going to have below median salaries, and folks who want to be, corporate law firm partners are going to have kind of above median salaries. Another thing to consider is you have experienced being successful and hardworking for most of your life so far. And once you get to law school, kind of the problem is, especially at the top schools, everyone else has too. And now you're trying to all get that same job or maybe reach for that same brass ring against other people who have excelled at many of the same things that you have. I would also say that, it's probably not a good idea to go into law for the money because you might just be miserable. So you might be stuck in, a big law firm working the same 80-hour weeks as the friends who went into investment banking. But you will have spent more years in school with maybe more debt, and you'll be reading contracts instead of kind of working on Excel and PowerPoint. So if you want money, I would just tell you to go into finance or entrepreneurship or startups or something like that. I will say it's ironic that when I was a junior at Brown, I really scoffed at the idea of investment banking, and I was like, oh, that's not for me. And now I'm a securities lawyer, and a huge part of that involves dealing with investment bankers who are helping companies raise money or do initial public offerings. And I now teach corporate finance to law students who, give me the evil eye because they were told that there would be no math. So it's all a long way of saying go to law school primarily because you think you want to be a lawyer, but not necessarily because it's worth it to be a lawyer as compared to a dentist or many of a number of other, careers you can have after law school.
Right. So you were a clerk for the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit, which is, a very prestigious clerkship, to say the least. How did that experience impact the trajectory of your career?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I'll say two things. One is it was a fantastic opportunity to see up close from behind the scenes the inner workings of a federal court, where legal decisions binding across the land are being argued and decided and written and made and all that other stuff. And so for a particular kind of career path that I was really focused on when I was in law school, it seemed like the number one ideal thing for me at the time. I will say, I can elaborate on that a little bit, but before I do, probably the best payoff long term has been the relationship I built with the judge. In a clerkship, you and perhaps two or three other recent law graduates work closely together in a very hermetic environment with the judge, and it's kind of insular and it's very exciting, but it's also not at all what legal practice is like. That said, that sort of relationship that you build can be a really fantastic kind of mentorship and opportunity to kind of get to meet people and to have a professional advisor for the rest of your career. And so from that perspective, it was a really pivotal moment for me. I'm really glad I did it. Had I done things all over again, I probably would have still done it. But I might have also made other choices along the way and done different practices. So,
Right.
it really all depends on kind of what your long-term goals are. And, I mentioned that it was important for me when I was in law school. And the main reason is that when I was sitting in your position, I thought, well, maybe I want to go be a professor someday. And I thought, well, I could do political science, but, I don't really have the math chops for that. Or I could go to law school and try and become a law professor. And at the time, the traditional path for doing that was to go to a top school, get a clerkship, work for a few years at a law firm, and then go be a law professor. And largely that model has changed. Almost everyone these days either has a PhD or has spent several years after practice in fellowships or other kind of preparatory positions. And so the structure of the market has changed. And so I just throw that out there for those of you kind of thinking on a 10-year time horizon. That messy office looks like what I aspire to.
Right. So it kind of all goes to say that, a federal clerkship or just a clerkship in general can serve, many more purposes than simply for those who aspire to be judges, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, let me put it really bluntly, right? There's a whole different set of particular pieces of advice that I would give to people who like want to be judges, or really kind of are interested in particular career paths in the law. And I should say, if you kind of open invitation to the viewers of this, if you're interested in kind of advice about the legal market or about law school, I'm generally happy if I have time to like chat with people. So, reach out. But no, I mean, clerkships are definitely not for only for people who want to be judges, in part because there are many more clerks every year than there are judgeships. And the bigger thing that it's probably bigger career path that it's useful for is folks who want to be practicing litigators, either trial lawyers or other folks who handle lawsuits, or I should say, like criminal prosecution or defense in a court, right? There's no better way to understand how a court works than to sit behind the scenes for a year or two. And if you planned on being, a public defender in San Diego, then wow, I'm going to tell you that you should try and get a clerkship in, the magistrate or the federal district court and, the Southern District of California, and by the same token, state courts are often overlooked. But from a long-term perspective, clerkships are neither kind of the rarefied air of people who are only going to be judges in the future, nor are they kind of a necessary step toward having a successful and fulfilling law career. Different law careers, different pathways toward different sorts of legal careers look very different for different people.
It's a great answer, and it's a very comprehensive answer. So you got a master's degree in international relations from U Chicago. How did that influence your desire to go to law school, or do you think that had any effect?
Yeah, so I'll say it definitely increased my desire to go to law school, and it maybe had an effect, but I wouldn't recommend it as like trying to target it as a way of getting into law school. So my advice on a master's degree program, I had a 1-year master's in international relations at Chicago. They offer a couple other programs, master's in social sciences, master's in humanities, whatever. Many schools do this sort of thing. I did it as a substitute for getting a political science PhD. And I think in general, postgraduate degrees should have funding like that. And if they don't, you should think of them as a way for a school to collect tuition from you to subsidize the people who they really want to be there. And so, from a general advice perspective, I'm not sure that it is substantially worth it to earn another degree if your goal is just to go to law school. And you may, depending on your circumstances, you may find that you actually would do better presenting yourself as someone who wants to get a joint degree JD MBA or, a JD MA if you have your ducks in a row, because you might be able to like apply courses in one field to requirements in the other and like make it cheaper or less time. it's possible, like my situation, that if you can go get a master's somewhere and build up, either some additional academic record or experience, if you feel like that's really lacking, and if it makes economical sense for you to do it, then, who am I to tell you not to do it? But I will say that the most important part of a law school candidate's application for most people is going to be your undergraduate GPA and your LSAT. And the rest is icing on the cake. And let me just say, the amount of investment that it takes to increase your LSAT score just that little bit is so much more worth it for you to spend your time doing than like thinking about getting a master's degree that might cost you, mid 5 figures. And just like the timing and the cost really don't match up. I will say I ended up in that Chicago MA program in part because I think I appeared to them to be too dumb to get into the political science PhD, at least because I blew off my math GRE. And so that's maybe the last or second to last comment I'll leave you with, which is that, the sorts of investments that you can make in standardized tests are really important and can really move the needle in terms of your ability to get admission to some program. And I think that's true not just in law school, but in lots of other areas as well. If you're thinking about PhDs, master's programs, med school, dental school, whatever, it's kind of all the same deal. I think my takeaway is I would caution people against going down that master's route specifically as a means of getting admission to law school if you don't really otherwise feeling it in your heart, and if it doesn't make economic sense for you.
Well, that's about as candid as advice as I've ever heard from a law professor. So, especially on the topic of admissions. So that's all the time we have. Professor Tierney, thanks again for joining me today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I wish you all luck with this cool new journal project. It's, as I said, it seems like it's going to be great. And as I mentioned, I am always happy to chat with students. You can find me on Twitter at James F. Tierney, and you can email me. My contact info is on my faculty page. So thanks very much for having me, and good luck with with the journal and with law school admissions.
Thanks. We'll blast those handles. Appreciate it.
Yeah, great.